My name's Lucia Heath. I'm the CEO of Women for Election. It's my pleasure to welcome you and to also welcome our wonderful speaker today, Dr. Sophie Scamps MP. This is a wonderful full circle event for me in terms of Sophie being an attendee at our first ever Equip training event that we ran online in COVID. So excuse me if every now and then I just get a little bit kind of reminiscent in that respect. But I would like to pause and just do an acknowledgement of country. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Bidjigal and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and to future leaders emerging, and to any First Nations people on the call as well. It's a key part of our mission to help First Nations women run for office and see themselves as future political leaders. And we do that work through our association with Politics in Colour. And we're about to launch a national program to really amplify that work as well. So I'm always available if anyone wants to ask anything further about that. But today is about talking with Sophie about her journey to a political career, and I guess getting a bit of a sense of looking under the hood as well once you're actually in Parliament, Sophie. So with your permission, I'd like to get underway, ask the first half dozen questions, and then pass it to our audience. You happy with that?
Yes, very happy. Thanks, Lucia, and you're doing amazing work. So thank you to everyone at Women for Election.
Thanks, Sophie. Well, look, before we get into the cut and thrust of the political world, I want to talk more about, I guess, the few years that led up to you deciding that you were going to run. Would you say that you were always politically engaged? Were you a political wonk like me? Were the discussions around the dinner table, or was there something that particularly triggered you to say, all right, I've got to engage? Give us some insight.
Yeah, so I very much, I was a very busy mum and working away as a GP like a lot of women are. And I would say I was actively engaged and aware, but not active. So I actually think I spent a lot of time trying to convince other people that they needed to act on particular things, particularly climate change. So I was looking around and I sort of look back at myself and I would try and convince people that, wouldn't it be a great idea if we did this? And maybe you should step up and do that. And then, and I was getting more and more concerned about the lack of national leadership on climate change, more and more frustrated, until one day, and I think I had tried that to convince other people to act. And then it just dawned on me one day, and I don't know why it took so long. Maybe it was because I was busy, that actually, so if you're one of the most privileged people on this planet in the terms of the education that I'd received, the stability of our country, and having a safe place to live, all those things. And actually, why wasn't I myself doing more? And so I think that light bulb moment for me was really important. So I decided to do what I could in my life and in my family's life. And the children were really, really excited as well. And when one of my friends' kids said to me, because we were talking, they were asking about climate change, and I said, yes, it's something that you kids will need to deal with in the future, sort of trying not to worry them too much. But and they said, yeah, one of the kids said, yes, because you adults have failed us. And then that was a big step up moment. All right, I've got to step into this. But I think what happened for me was that when I made that decision that I was going to try and do what I could, and it certainly wasn't that I was going to run as a federal politician or be a candidate. It was literally, what will I do in my life, in my family's life? And I know there's a lot of people in the community feeling the same way. And it was sort of, about bringing people together and making changes in our own community. But when my language changed from, how about we do this? We should do this. Why don't you do that? and everyone going, yes, 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 and nothing happening, to this is what I'm doing this, and people saying, well, how can I help? How can I jump on board and help? And that's when it really took off and grew. So it was a mindset thing, but also that realization that why wasn't it me that was actually stepping up to do something? You know, we're often waiting for other people to do things, and actually you're the person, you're it. And actually, isn't that's what Helen Haynes and all the group in Indi always say, Kathy McGowan always saying, if not you, then who? If not now, then when? And it really did resonate with me when I started to hear that as well.
Well, there's a couple of things that peaked for me then, Sophie, and I want to acknowledge that Kathy's sister Ruth is on the call today, so was part of that movement as well. I think that I remember clear as day you contacting me in 2020 and saying, I'd really like to sign up to this training, but I don't want to be the candidate. And by the way, I'm a GP and 7 p.m. start might be problematic for me. Are you still happy for me to join the course in that case? And then you did join the course, and we were so privileged to have you there, obviously. And I remember you saying clearly to our first cohort there, saying, you know, I've started this group, Voices of Mackellar. I'm looking for a candidate, if any of you are from the electorate. And it's just amazing reflecting back on that now. And I just want to drill in particularly because then I saw you in an event like 9 months later on the North Shore, as it happens, and you were still looking for the candidate. You were still looking for the candidate. And what was it? I mean, the steady, maybe it was just the compounding bit, but I remember saying to you, it's you.
That's what I mean. It often takes us a while to realize that we might be the right person. I think that's maybe often the way with women, but also it was such a change for me. I mean, there were precedents. I'd been working as a GP and I absolutely loved my career, but I did, and I was looking after a cohort of patients, but there was always in the back of my mind, I could be doing more for our community. You know, all that thing about the social determinants of health. If we were acting on climate change, if there was proper housing for people, then we could be helping so many more people than what I'm currently doing. So that was always sort of niggling at the back of my mind. But we, as you said, with some friends had started up our own Voices of Mackellar group. And we had decided early on the piece, everyone does it slightly differently, as you would know, comes down to the community. And we had decided that our group would be non-political or neutral so that we would hear from as many people as possible. And what our aim was to build a report to give to the people in the candidates who were going to run in the election. So that was kind of where we started. And it was just the most invigorating experience, because people who were a little bit circumspect about joining this whole thing, a lot of people are like, no, I'm not really political. So it's not politics. It's just about what's important to you. And we'd go around the table really respectfully and asking people, what's important to you? What solutions would you like to see? And what came out. And that was sort of one of the final questions. And people were coming up themselves with the idea that they needed an independent to represent them, so that actually they were genuinely represented and heard. And once people had come up with that, they were saying, well, where is this? Where are they? And we'd say, well, there isn't anyone. And that was sort of a real downer for a lot of people. So eventually, Anyo Geddes and I decided to step aside from the Voices group, and that kept going and was really powerful, and really brought a lot of people into the democracy. But we started that grassroots movement to bring people together to look for this candidate, to look for the right person for our community. And it was really quite clear what people wanted, what type of representative that they wanted. That was one of the specific questions we asked. And over and over again, people would say, we don't want a career politician. We want somebody that's from the community, who will listen to us, who's got our best, intentions at heart for the community, who, and it really was about listening and trust and being from the community and not being a career politician. And we had in our minds, I think initially, that to win the election, we needed somebody with a high profile, so that's what we were looking for. And everyone was like, time and time again, it was like, no thanks, we don't want someone with a high profile. We want this person who is from the community, who is genuinely passionate about representing our community. And like, just time and time again, when people say, why are you doing it? I said, oh no, I'm not doing it. And the reason I wasn't doing it it wasn't in my mindset. And I've said this quite, I really did not like public speaking at all. I was like, oh gosh, how would I do that? I hate public speaking. That's a big part of the role. But in actual fact, I do think I was in a really good position, because being a GP, one of the main skills that you learn is to listen. And listen first and listen well. Otherwise, you get the diagnosis wrong. And also, there was such a major trust deficit, with politicians. People just had enough, fed up with all the pork barreling and all the different corruption scandals that had gone on. So trust was a huge thing, and people do tend, part of what I'd done as a GP was spend years building up relationships with people in the community. And one of the questions people used to ask me a lot, they'd say, oh, what type of doctor are you? Thinking, who is this phony? And I say, I'm a GP in Narrabeen. And they go, oh, okay. So there was that sense that I was actually embedded in the community, which was really important. And I think it just grew. And I should say as well, as I did another one of your courses, and it was a leadership course. And it was just good talking to other people during that, just knowing that, and just talking it through, and understanding that actually there's so many other times in my life where I have lent into areas that were really uncomfortable for me. And this would be another uncomfortable experience, but I knew from experience that it would change, that I'd become very comfortable with it. So I had been an athlete, so I was used to sort of stepping out onto the track and putting myself in the race. And then at different times in my life, in my career, like working in emergency, when I first started that was incredible. I used to feel quite sick going into the emergency department because it's such high stakes. But in the end, I was so comfortable in that area. And then I moved into general practice, and that was then another big step into something that was quite uncomfortable. And then understanding that after some time and experience, it becomes your sphere of comfort again. So having had that experience, it's good to know, even though something's really uncomfortable, it's okay, that you will get better at it. And I sort of knew I'd probably get better at public speaking and become more comfortable in the role.
Well, I believe you have, and it's just been wonderful watching you in the job and watching you learn. I mean, you're only in your first term, but again, Sophie, like there's so much there. I think the incremental pieces of dawning of, it is me and I can do this is a journey that we've seen time and time and time again. And one of our missions at Women for Election is to change the narrative about how we discuss politics. I don't want to be political. That's politics. I don't want to be involved, because a lot of people are really vested in maintaining that narrative to keep us out.
Exactly.
So let's just put a prick in that balloon and say, and that's going to lead me to my next question, because I've run for a federal seat, didn't win, but it wasn't toxic. Now, sorry, I'm taking a step back. Didn't get elected, but did win because I changed the conversation in my electorate by running. But everybody told me it would be toxic, and it wasn't. It was one of the most positive experiences of my life. And I'm going to say it time and time again. Now, if you can take yourself back, and I promise we're going to get to Canberra shortly, but, looking back now with the benefit of hindsight at your federal campaign, would you say that it was more of a negative or that toxic experience, or would you say that it lent more towards the positive experience? Trying to strip out the ultimate result, just the experience itself.
No, the experience itself was the most wonderful experience that you could possibly imagine, because, and that's even without the the result, because it was this incredible coming together of the community and people who had just felt completely cut out and shut out and disenfranchised from their democracy for so long, finally feeling that they had a voice and that they were excited to be involved in their democracy. And we're so lucky to have this democracy, and we need people to be involved. But like you said, I think that had been a really concerted campaign to try and keep people out of their democracy. When Scott Morrison said, and this is one thing that really G'd me up, was when he said, oh, actually climate change will not be solved at the the cafes, the dining tables, and the wine bars of the inner city suburbs. It was infuriating, because it just gaslit so many people who had major concerns that were not being respected or acted upon. And so what I agree, what we were trying to do is give people back their democracy, so they felt that it was theirs and it was a part, they were a part of it. And just that coming together of community was so invigorating and so, what's the word, euphoric in many, many ways. And the friendships and the camaraderie, so many, and all these groups of people, there were hundreds of people that came together to get involved in this. So many very strong friendships, and that they're still together. And I was aware, of course, before I stepped into it, that there would be moments that were toxic. Yes, there would be things thrown at me. It's politics, there is that party and I knew it would happen, but I just thought, well, we've just got to do what we're doing. And that whole example of what had happened in Indi, and through the voices of keeping it polite, keeping it really positive and maintaining positive and staying on our story, on our target and what we were trying to achieve, and not being pulled into all the other rubbish and the toxic stuff. And so many people just had this wonderful, one of the most wonderful experiences in their life. And I've got to say, it was for me as well. And so many people were just so grateful that I had stepped up to do it. Yeah.
I'm so glad we didn't get the chance to workshop these questions beforehand. So I'm glad that that it was a positive experience. Because it's not lost on me that the people who say don't do it, it's bad, it's gonna be bad for you, are the people who choose to keep running for election.
And I'll say as well is that the wonderful thing was, it was community. There's no factional infighting, there's no party, and it really was just this grassroots movement of community, and a lot of positivity and hope. I think it was running on hope that there would be a better way.
Sounds good to me. And then you'll be moving towards a second federal campaign in the not too distant future, I imagine. Okay, I'm going to get to Canberra now. So you were elected in May 2022. You had a busy career before then, so I'm sure lots of people were saying, oh, how are you going to manage going from there to A to B and things like that, but forgetting that you already had a busy lifestyle and juggling and things like that. So but I am super keen to understand the commitment, if you are a federal MP, which changes if you're with local council or in a state seat and you live in the burbs. What percentage of time are you spending in Mackellar, in your electorate, versus in Canberra? Give us a rough time of the ratio split.
I think it would be 40-60, 40% in Canberra and 60% back here in my electorate at home. So okay. It's I think we sit probably on average it would be 20 weeks a year, and a week in Canberra runs from the Monday to the Thursday. So usually head down there on a Sunday evening, and most parliamentarians shoot off on Thursday night. Or the Friday if there's other things on down there, and are back for the weekend, and then you go back down again. Okay. Usually if it's sitting 2 weeks in a row. So I think typically they would try and do 2 weeks in a row and then 2 weeks off, but it doesn't always happen like that, that's for sure. But yeah, there's a lot of time in the community as well, and that's really a very big part of it.
Do you have favorite things that you're doing when you're in the electorate?
Yeah, getting out and about. I think one of the most wonderful things is getting to know the community better and just seeing all the amazing things that different people are doing to support other people in the community, the volunteers, and we have these wonderful surf clubs. You know, there's so many different groups doing incredible things that you otherwise I wouldn't have known about. And it's just so inspirational on so many levels. And you just realize how much our community is driven by these really giving people and individuals, and how much we rely on that. Yeah. And I think COVID as well brought that out a bit more. But that has been one of the most wonderful things, is learning more about the wonderful people in the community and what they're all doing.
Oh, and there's a role for everyone. You know, the people who attend our events, some ultimately run, some are there to be a more informed voter, and some are there because they want to understand how they can assist another woman to run. So, you know, there's a role for everyone, depending on your skill set, where you are in your life, and great learning to be a volunteer in a campaign as well.
Oh, incredible. And most of the people who were involved in our campaign, we now have this beautiful office of, you know, people who are really passionate about what they're doing, and have a really good, you know, feel inside the office. And the other thing I'd say is, you probably experienced as well, is we did have a lot of our campaign, in that whole grassroots movement was very largely in a large part driven by women. So that way of doing things, you know, having conversations in a respectful way, is incredibly powerful. Like those networks. So when women are mobilized, oh my goodness, don't underestimate it, because it was just so powerful. It was really amazing.
Yeah, and I don't think it's going away either. So I want to talk now, because I've been following this closely, because I think it's extraordinarily important. But in terms of your time in Canberra, and in March this year, you introduced your first private members bill, which is colloquially known as the ending jobs for mates.
Ending jobs for mates.
Ending jobs for mates bill. And by the way, I know you're speaking in the Australian Institute event tomorrow, I think, on the bill. So maybe we can put the link in the chat for that, because I'd encourage everyone to get along to that. There's two things that I want to ask specifically. The first is, can you talk us through what a private members bill is, and how many of those you get a year, a term, versus other members, and then going into the bill itself, and why that is particularly important for you and your electorate.
Okay, fantastic. So private members bill is basically a bill that is put forward by somebody who's not in the government. So the government puts forward their own bills, and different ministers put forward their bills, and a private members bill is put forward by somebody who's not in government. And I'm actually not sure if there's a limit, but you can opt to try and get what, if you're doing a private members bill, they're usually accepted. So you introduce it, and you have somebody second it, and then it sits on a list, and it can be selected if it's going to be further debated, a private members bill. So this is the kind of confounding thing, is that private members bills actually never get debated. So the government never selects them. But don't give up hope, because what actually happens is, it's a lot of what we do is about that, just shining a light on what needs to be done and where there's gaps. And so when you think about Helen Haynes and Cathy McGowan and others who are working on, you know, an integrity commission, they went through the same process, where they would introduce a private members bill, it wouldn't get debated, it would drop off. But there's a whole lot of there's a huge conversation that happens around it in the media and all around it. And every time something comes up that's, you know, in the case of the Integrity Commission, more corrupt behaviour, then it comes up again. So it becomes well known in the, you know, it becomes part of the national discourse, the conversation, and people become more and more informed. And what actually drives change is people, the community, the voters being aware of what's going on. So it's just a way of informing the population about, hey, there's this need, this is lacking, and keep talking about it until actually it's the population that drives the government to do something about it, which is exactly what happened with the National Anti-Corruption Commission. You finally get to a point where, and like Helen and others did an incredible job at the last election. When you think about it, the two top issues were climate change. That was driven by Zali Steggall bringing up constantly. Neither the government or the Labor Party really wanted to talk about it all that much, but Zali Steggall, as an independent, you know, you're able to take those tough decisions, make the tough calls and say we need to act. Whereas the parties were happier to kind of keep that quiet. And exactly the same thing with the Integrity Commission as well. Helen Haynes, for 3 years beforehand, had talked about it non-stop. So at the last election, it was one of the biggest issues, and people demanded that we have an anti-corruption commission. It became an absolute no-brainer, and the government, whoever was going to be the government, had to act. And that's kind of how it will go again with this type of thing. And so why is it important? As I mentioned, integrity was one of the most very important things at the last election. And here in Mackellar, we did a lot with our kitchen table conversations and any polling we've done. Integrity is so important. And we know that trust had been more just gradually eroded in our politicians and parliamentarians. So trying to rebuild that trust in our democratic system and in the way that our politicians behave is really, really important. And the Anti-Corruption Commission is absolutely fantastic, and it's a start. But it's there to catch out or investigate after corruption has actually occurred. So what we want to try and do is actually prevent that corruption happening in the first. And it's not even corruption in the criminal sense. It's just not acting in the best interests of Australians or the people that you represent. That's basically what it is, in, you know, self-interest or what other interest. And so my Ending Jobs for Mates bill is all about getting integrity into those appointments process, so that we know that we are, one, getting the best person for the job, not just somebody that is going to do what the party wants or says, or is a mate that they want to give a favour to, but also that it's done in a transparent and independent way. So there's no behind the scenes back dealing, and we know that we can trust the decisions that are coming out of these important bodies. So examples would be recently the Administrative Appeals Tribunal had to be completely disbanded because in the last bit of the coalition's leadership, it had just been stacked with more and more party-friendly appointments, so much so that it was just dysfunctional, and many of the people that were appointed actually didn't have the qualifications or the expertise to be in that role. So it was just, that is one of the most important democratic institutions in our country, because that's who you go to when if you have an issue with a government decision, and it had been completely undermined. And so what my bill does is to build in a transparent and independent process for these appointments, and that's around each ministerial area or department having an independent selection panel, and there being a commissioner as well for appointments, who is also independently selected. So this independent selection panel for each of those departments will decide on a short list, and then the minister will be able to choose from the short list. So they do have an element of discretion, but it's not entirely up to the minister to just choose whoever they want. They just can only choose from this short list. And there's a whole lot of criteria how that independent selection panel gets selected themselves. And also there's a whole process around having to advertise for a certain amount of time in various places for that appointment. Right. So there's a whole process around it to make it as transparent and independent as possible.
Okay, well, I thank you for going into more detail, because I see it as another touchstone of the integrity piece. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly right. It's just another pillar. There's so many different pillars, and this is just one more pillar to try and strengthen the democracy.
I suspect we'll have more questions about that specifically, and I have shared in the chat the event tomorrow with the Australian Institute that I'd encourage anyone to go along to if you'd really want to hear the nuts and bolts about what Sophie's put forward in the bill. One more question from me, and then we'll go to the audience. And I'm happy for people to take themselves off mic rather than me ask the questions. But again, in Canberra, when you are walking those halls, or even staying in accommodation over that time, how friendly, how accessible are the MPs and senators and their staffers behind the scenes? How easy is it to have cross-party collaboration behind the scenes? We're all fully aware what it looks like out the front of house, but super keen to understand more about the ability to come together in forums separate to more formal occasions, because we Women for Election have been saying for a couple of years now, Australia is the only country in the OECD Westminster system that does not have a cross-party women's caucus. And that, I believe, lends itself to potentially more adversarial environment. However, I'm here to hear you say if that is not the case, it's not adversarial. What's your views?
I think it'd be a great idea to have that cross-party caucus of women in Parliament. I think it'd be fantastic. A few things. People are generally friendly. The opportunity to collaborate across parties isn't always there, but this is what I'll say. And you don't generally see much of the senators either. Like, everyone is so busy, you don't see much of what's going on in the Senate. I think there's a couple of ways you come into contact with one another. I've been lucky. I've been on a few trips, one to PNG and one to Northern India to meet the Tibetan Parliament in exile, and they are really good trips because you spend a lot of time in cross-party situations. So people you wouldn't normally get to speak to, you spend a lot of time with them. So that is really good. That's great. You just can see that you're normal people and you're respectful conversations. All that type of thing is great, and develop friendships across parties. So that has been really, really good. And then the other way, there's these groups, these parliamentary friends of hundreds of different types of groups, and they're often there's cross-party sort of co-chairs. So I'm in the parliamentary friends of GPs, and there's always a Liberal, an Independent, and a Labor. So that kind of collaboration is really good as well. There's a lot. I think the class of 22. I mean, people are pretty friendly in that group. We have a chat group, so there is quite a bit of chat that goes on. And of course, the crossbench, there's a lot of, we get together all the time and have a lot of conversations. No, it's wonderful.
Well, see, that is so. Class of 22 have a chat group, so that always makes me feel, that fills me with inspiration and makes me feel that we're making progress. Might be a bit glacial.
We're making progress. And well, the other thing I should say is a bit of a fun thing. Last Christmas, Monique Ryan got T-shirts made up saying, for all of us new crossbenchers, saying, what would Helen do? So she's a role model.
I think I remember seeing a couple of images from that at the time. So different people's socials. Look, Sophie, that's it for my kind of formal questioning. I'm super keen to open it up to all of our audience members, and Kira. Oh God, Kira, it's Kyra.
Kyra, yeah.
Oh, Kyra, I corrected myself.
Yes,
I'm sorry about that. Kyra, do you want to ask your question first?
Yeah, I guess what's kind of like the biggest learning curve that you've had from obviously not being a career politician to coming in? Like, obviously you've kind of got this idea of what like it looks like, but what has been like the biggest sort of misconception that you probably had to then sort of come in and then be like, it's just not what I expected?
Yeah, I know that's the trickiest question, because I'm not really sure what I expected. I compare it to when I was, you kind of have an idea of what might go on, but you're not really sure. I compare it to when I was a junior doctor, having finished medical school and being an intern, and you're in this huge building that's hard to find your way around. There's buzzers going off, there's emergencies the whole time. I think, look, I think it's been incredible. It is quite different from what has happened in the past, because there is such a large crossbench. So I think it's a new scenario for a lot of people, and the way that we're trying to work in a far more collaborative way as well. So actually the government has been really good in saying, look, our doors are open, come and talk to us, and we will definitely, I think the crossbench has a really strong role. Each of us, at different times will have different amendments in pushing the government and holding them to account in quite a different way to what the opposition will do as well. But I think what's surprised me the most is just how open probably the government has been to hearing from us and to taking feedback and things, and trying to, where they can, incorporate changes in, amendments into their bills and things. So one of the most amazing things, I think, and I don't know that it's happened before, is that in sitting weeks, all the government ministers that are introducing bills or amendments that week will come and brief the crossbench. So it's quite unheard of as well, but it's a really positive thing to do and constructive, because we can ask our questions then. We know what they're bringing in, they've given us the heads up. We know whether it's something that we support, and we understand their motivation for doing it. So it just saves a lot of time, and it's a far more constructive way of going about, building better policy than just sort of, surprising you with things. Every now and then they do surprise us, but I think probably that move into trying to do things in a more constructive way has been really, really, I think, the most surprising thing.
Thanks. Thanks, Kyra. It's funny, Sophie, because that when I think, again, particularly women see more collaboration and less adversary, that success begets success. So what we're finding is that more and more women are coming to us saying, I feel like I can get involved now. I feel
good.
So that, there's a lot vested in us trying to maintain that type of decorum and that
yes.
And so we're right behind you and trying to do that.
Well, it is. It's and I think it's a very intentional way to try and do politics in a as respectful way as possible, and respecting each other's difference, but doing it in a constructive way, bringing forward amendments that we think are important, and having, calm, reasoned discussions, not just sort of hurling abuse at each other across the chamber. Because that's what people want. Like people are just so sick to death of that really adversarial way of doing politics. We've got so many challenges ahead of us, and people just want solutions, not infighting and headbanging.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Katrina, you had a question.
Yes. Why does the unmute button always elude me when I need it? Sophie, thank you so much for your time. I guess my question was, we're seeing this broad trend of people more and more moving away from the major parties, a greater number of independents, yourself included, getting elected. I'm just really curious as to how you're reading the tea leaves as to the trends we might see maybe over the next decade in federal parliament. Do you think this is something that's likely to continue, maybe a move to minority government? Just like to get your reflection on that.
I do think, I think the parties will always be there. I do think that a lot of different electorates and communities are watching on and sort of thinking we might like a bit of that action. That sort of, it is a different way of doing it. I mean, when you think about it, a party, the way it has been, a party has represented, needs to represent, if it's a majority party, 76 different electorates across the country, and they can be really diverse. And that's what was happening here, is that people were feeling that our electorate just was not represented, that it was being, other electorates were being represented, and actually our views and values were not. So I guess it depends on what the parties do, really, and does there remain a space for community independence? I personally think that there always will be, and how big that movement gets, we'll have to wait and see. But I do think as well, there was a lot of, they tried to drum up a lot of fear around, having a lot of independence and the fact that there would be chaos and, how would a party rule. But actually, I think, what I'm trying to do and the others are trying to do is show that it is a really constructive voice, and it's really important to have other voices in there as well, rather than just two voices opposing each other and opposing, because that's what you do, not because you're trying to improve the policy work, or and also the good thing about being independent is you can work across the board. You try and build those alliances everywhere, find your common ground and work together on things. So it is, I guess, maybe we are a bit of a trial in many ways of a larger crossbench and how constructive it is. But I think that fear around it being chaos is just sort of because actually in the Senate, the government doesn't have the majority, and so it is coming down to a lot of negotiations in the end as well, and it has been functioning very well. And as many people say, there's so many different minority governments around the world, and that's the norm. It's just that it hasn't been the norm here in Australia. So it's interesting. It's going to be exciting. I do think it's a really strong way of just whatever happens, of reinvigorating our democracy, getting other voices in and bringing people who wouldn't normally feel that they're political or just not interested because whatever goes on down there is just down in Canberra, but just bringing it back to what's important in people's lives so that they feel that they can actually have a say over their future. And particularly important for young people as well with this whole mental health drama. If you feel like you're not being heard and you're not a part of it, of course it has an impact on your mental health. Yeah.
Thanks,
Katrina.
And you're so right, Sophie. I think something I haven't mentioned on this call, but you're attending a launch event of Women for Elections down in Canberra on the 15th of June that not only launches our parliamentary friendship group, but also launches our federal grant to be able to scale up the work that we're doing, which will really focus particularly on those, what I would call politically underrepresented cohorts of women, of which one in Australia is young women. We are no disrespect to you, the average age of our politician in Australia is much older than equivalent nations. So, same regional and remote women in regional and remote Australia, women from the queer community, women of colour as well, and women from disabled communities. So that's a really clear mandate of ours over the next 5 years. Now, I know there's a question from Carly and a question from Lisa, and then I know, Sophie, that we have to let you go. So, Carly?
Hi, Sophie. Thank you so much. It's been a really interesting conversation. It's wonderful, and congratulations on winning and the way you've been standing and representing your electorate and standing up for women. It's very valuable, so thank you. So I want to know, when you experience forms of misogyny or sexism, what are your best responses or reactions?
I think it's not. That's a really good question. I'm just thinking of, I haven't in Parliament experienced a huge amount of misogyny or sexism in Parliament myself, but I do think it's quite different for women who are independent. I do think we're treated differently from perhaps what happens within a party and the different factions. I think a lot of that toxicity comes inside the parties often, whereas we're a bit of an unknown. When you meet, it's on a respectful level as well. So I haven't had that sexism. I would say there's, I, for the first time in my life, really felt I was being mansplained to the other day. And I never use that term. I sort of find it's derogatory, but I was just thinking, oh my goodness. And I actually didn't know how to respond. I just sort of sat there and I thought, okay, well, I just continue to do my, you continue to respond in your respectful way, as you would like to be treated. And sort of, it was an interesting engagement, I've got to say. But what would you say? how do you respond if you're in that situation?
I think it's true. I think, you know, we have all these ideas about how we'll respond, and we believe that we're strong and efficient and tough. But when we're placed in those very provocative and sometimes fearful situations, we don't know how to respond. I think the best thing for me is I am quite upfront about it. Stop gaslighting me. This is what I said. Or, you know, my experience is that a lot of men have taken my ideas and then called them their own. So I will always turn around and say, actually, that was my idea. I just said that at this time. But I have to say, I sound really tough, but I don't always have the gumption to stand up for myself. But I am getting better as I get older.
Yeah, I think that's part of the confidence that we like to impart as part of our training as well. So that's like in bystander training, understanding how to use social media, understanding you know, key phrases like thanks for your input and then keep walking. Just civil but strong.
Thanks for your input. That's exactly right. And Kathy and the Indi crew give a good training on that as well, how you disengage sometimes from troubles. You know, sometimes you just don't go there.
Yep.
Takes you into a hole.
Yeah, and it's not your role as a politician to always make the popular decision. So it's not going to appease everyone all the time. So all right, I'm conscious of your time. Lisa, you lucky last, you get the last question.
Thank you. My question is rather out there, but I can see it, hopefully. If the crossbench got so large that it became the majority, could you see that? And could you see an independent as PM if that was to happen? Or even if it didn't?
That's a very good question. I think that's I mean, I guess it could happen. I don't think we've sort of thought that far ahead because it was such a big change in what happened in the last election as well. And I guess, you know, up until this date, it has been, you know, a party being able to choose the Prime Minister. But I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, often what happens is you get smaller parties, you know, coalescing. So whether it's lots and lots of independents or whether it's smaller parties being created, it'd be hard to know. But I think there's always going to be a role for, or not always, but just in the foreseeable future, there'll still be a strong role for Labor and Liberal. But it was very interesting to sort of try and wonder what's going to happen in the future, isn't it? And I don't have that crystal ball, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's a very far out question, but you girls in particular, women, are doing such a sensational job that I can't not imagine other women wanting to step up and join you.
Great. Yeah, that's great. And we'll see what happens. But it is a real kind of turning point for Australian democracy, I think, because the parties really were taking their electorates for granted in a big way. And so whatever happens, parties, they need to sort of have a look at themselves, or otherwise there will be a lot more community independents getting in, I think, because as more and more people feel like they're not being represented.
And
so it's an interesting, very interesting question. I agree with you. I'm not sure what's going to happen though, Lisa.
Well, I recommend everyone read this book.
What is it? Hang on.
Oh, sorry.
What was the book?
The Indi.
The Indi Way.
Yeah. So that's yes, that's on my bedside table, as is a lot of other books that one day I will get to. I promise myself. But in the meantime, Sophie, thank you again. I know we've taken a little bit more of your time than we promised today, but look, it's been a real highlight for me doing this interview and watching your political career just surge, and the power that you're bringing to other people through inspiring them as well, where they realize, hey, I'm a GP too. I can do my view. I'm a climate scientist as well. Well, hang on, I've been advocating for First Nations justice for 20 years. I know exactly what needs to be done. and I'm going to advocate from inside the tent now. So just keep in mind on the tougher days that you're inspiring others, and that's got lots of positive knock-on effects for the health of our democracy. So keep going. Good. We'll see you in Canberra on the 15th of June for our breakfast launch. And we look forward to engaging with all of you in an ongoing way. We will shortly be launching our federal program. In the meantime, we have two in conversation events coming up, one with Angie Bell, who is a Liberal MP based on the Goldie in the Gold Coast. She's got a fascinating story into politics. And then the Minister for Women, Katie Gallagher, is joining us the following month as well. So again, a fascinating story leading into why she wanted to lean into politics. So look forward to seeing you at those future events. And Sophie, keep up the fabulous work.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the invitation. Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Bye, everybody. See you again. Take care.
Thanks, Lucia.
Thank you.